off like flower do. Sure, I know that just them has a story.
Hi, I'm Effie Barker. We are right here in downtown. When you say we're not going away with these issues, what are those issues? Good evening. Welcome to the special edition of I'm Effie Barker.
So how they take it when you speak, like, you know, when you say something, how are they reacting to that? Are they more accepting, or do they
in Texas or in the UK?
in the UK?
And speaking in regards to,
You say, you know, your pay that you were mentioning earlier, and
yeah,
also about anything when you see something and you say something, how?
So I do think that Americans tend to be very vocal. And I don't think they were, like, when I was speaking to my administration, I think that they kind of were surprised that I was kind of pushing back on just the negotiation process, that I wasn't just going to take what they were giving me. And they had talked to me about I think it's called the Burgundy Book, which again, I was not familiar with, but it's the teaching conditions in the UK. And I had not read on the Burgundy Book. I didn't know what the Burgundy Book was. I was like, what is she talking about? And so for me, they kept referring to this, and I was like, what is this Burgundy Book? So it goes back to, like, I wish I'd have had like a union representative there to help me through this process. But in the end, like, I wasn't able to get what I felt like I needed. They kind of increased it, but not as much as I would have liked it to be. And they just blamed it due to budgeting, which they always say that, right? So,
So what is a Burgundy Book then?
it's the book for teaching conditions and like bylaws in the UK. So they were blaming it that for whatever it is in the Burgundy Book, they were justifying that's why they could pay me what they were paying me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sort of, this is how it is. This is how it's done.
Yeah, and I was not familiar with it, so I couldn't really like argue when I wasn't familiar with whatever color book they were talking about, because I'm not from there, and my education degree was not in the UK. They teach you that stuff when you go through that teacher training, and just teachers in general know about it. But I've learned through that process, right, to like ask all the questions and try to get advice, you know, because I know that I think I would have had a lot more representation if I would have just had someone from a union, if I would have joined right from the get-go.
So how was your experience then? Do you get the same respect, or do they feel the different treatment because you're an American, or is it not because of that issue?
In regards to students, that is a good question, because culturally, Americans act different than British people. And then when you put them into a school where there are different rules that are just understood in the British culture and school systems, you know, I had to get used to that as well. And like I had mentioned, I was at an outstanding school, but it was very strict. And I do think that the British way of schooling is very traditional. And I was at a very large school that had thousands of students, and each class had 30 students in it. It was to capacity in each class. And so there were certain things now, as I'm an experienced educator, that I know that there's some battles that I want to fight and some battles that I'm not going to fight. And in regards to like dress code, you know, girls are not allowed to wear makeup or wear nail polish, fake eyelashes, like these things for me as an educator, holistically, and even my philosophy of teaching, if makeup or nail polish doesn't disrupt their learning, I'm fine. And as an American, I didn't have to wear a uniform to school. I didn't go to a private school. So I didn't have to ever be dress coded for not wearing a tie, or my skirt was, well, different skirts, but you know, like the uniform skirts for whatever reason. So I do feel that maybe some students thought I was a little bit more lax than other teachers, because the other teachers were British. They would be a little bit more stickler to the rules. I was a stickler for the big rules and like respect and making sure that your class on time, all the main things that are involved in learning. But some of the things I kind of let slide because I was like, this is not a battle that I feel like I should fight. But I would say that maybe some other teachers would have fought that battle just because that's how they grew up and that's just the way it is. So
So does your kids like it? Does the British kids like your approach that you're more lax on other things?
I think so. I think that even like the things I would say in the classroom just culturally is different than what a British teacher would say. Um, and so I think that they found that interesting. I think they found it funny. Just different colloquialisms that I would say because I'm from the South in America. Um, and there are just different things that I say, like y'all. So you all, and they just thought that that was hilarious, and they just thought that was so cool. So it would just be different things that maybe it was a lesson that I was teaching on, or things that I would say. Um, and then sometimes I would say things, and you could just tell that it would go over their head, and I was like, okay, so that might be just an American phrase then, like, and some of the things that they would say that is slang for Manchester and for England, I would have to figure out, like, what are you actually saying? So there was a little bit of that, like, language, different accents, different terminology for things. That was really interesting.
Did you get in trouble with that with the administration and how you approach this?
No, because I'm still a very like respected teacher. I'm still a strict teacher. Like I follow the main rules, but like it wasn't some of the things I let slide were small things, like really, really small things. Um, but for the most part, like I never really got in trouble. There was one part where, which is really strange to me. So in the UK system, the notebooks, I'm not for sure if you're familiar that kids will have these notebooks and they had to like cut and glue their work into the notebooks. Um, in education, we call them interactive student notebooks, but like you also take notes in there, you draw, you do really cool things with them. But my school is a big stickler about everything being glued into this notebook. And I'm in, for me as an educated teacher, I'm also now used to 21st century learning where computers and projects and all of these really cool outlets to learn. But I felt at the school that I was at, it was just very traditional, where it was pen and paper. I was, teaching at the front of the classroom every day. So that was again my philosophy of education was tested because there were some certain things that I did not agree with, but that was just the way that things were taught at this particular school. I'm not saying that that's how all schools are like, but I just feel like it is very traditional. As I do know that kids are able to learn in various outlets in various ways, and it's not always going to be the passive learning of teacher stands in the front of the classroom and you just listen, right? And you just
Hmm.
take notes. So that's how it was though, every day.
Right. Yeah. When I gave birth, that was a surprise for me that my record was in a physical folder, this thick, with the handwritten notes from the doctors and nurses.
Yep.
I mean, in Kaiser Permanente in Los Angeles, it's no paper at all. Where
Yeah,
when you get there, it's just computer. They just type
exactly.
their diagnosis, so everything is there. But yeah, certain things definitely in the UK are old school and traditional. But that's good that the because I was worried when you were telling me your story that man, she must have been called out and asked. Yeah, maybe the management, the administration must have asked her, why are you doing these things? But I think I felt that your the things that are important to you and they're important for the other teachers are different. They're concerned of this and you're concerned of this. So as long as you do the basic and the main thing you said and the rest are.
Yeah.
So
I
the thing
also
like yeah, go ahead.
I know. I was like, I also had a really good team that I always was asking questions. If I didn't know, just because I've never grew up in the British school system, I would ask. And it's
Mm,
so important because um, having a form tutor, um, where at our school there were certain ways that you did things, like as soon as the bell rang, the teachers knew to like walk away, like go to their classes, and the students would stay. And I had no idea what was going on, so I just followed the teachers. And so you just kind of have to like follow what everyone else is doing and then ask a ton of questions because
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I'm
You're
so
being
grateful for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my ex-husband is a AP US history. He's American, um, and government teacher in high school in the States. And yeah, he was always telling me that the administration always asks him of how he teaches, but never ask about what he teaches. Never
Mm,
once ask about what is he teaching. They're always just about on how it's being taught. And anyway,
yeah.
eventually he just left. He didn't want to teach anymore. He didn't want to work in general.
Yeah.
But so, what are the toughest experience that you had here in the UK? That something that you didn't really like that got into your nerves, and you say, "I don't want to hear." Was there a time?
Well, I would say definitely the just the experience overall of the visa process of teaching in the UK, um, and the cost of living crisis. I think it was just all of those intertwined that made my husband and I decide that like, okay, we're going to go back abroad to teach, because we had been reached out from or one of our friends that's teaching at the school currently had reached out to me about a position for psychology specifically, because that's what I love to teach and I want to get back to teaching. But we weren't for sure if we wanted to give the UK one more year, stick it out for one more year, or go back abroad. But I think it was just the combination of everything, the cost of living, um, the positions, just like not the amount of salary that we're getting for moving up the ladder in the pay scale just wasn't enough. And so we were just like, you know what, we can make a lot more money outside of the UK. So that's what we decided.
Mm.
Now let's go back to our guest, Michelle Guzman.
Was there any big surprise
Of living in the UK,
Mhm.
or
living in the UK?
I think that the experience of teaching in general in the UK, it was it was just kind of a little bit of a disappointment. I was hoping for more and for like better. Um, but I just see that a lot of people in England are struggling. And I didn't like to see that. Um, and so just the entirety of my experience, I mean, I loved it. There was a lot of really good highs as well. But I just think that because my career is education, I just couldn't see myself being an educator for a long time in the UK with the salary that was given, with the cost of living crisis as well.
Mm, right. But when you get here, have you noticed any? Is there any shared values? And if there are, what are they?
Yeah, I'm not for sure if this is specific to where I was in Manchester, because my husband's family, he has a really big family, and we all lived about 3 miles, a 3 mile radius from each other. And being from Texas and being from the South, I felt the family values, at least like in my husband's family and the family and like the other families in the community, I just felt people were really close to their families. Um, and so I felt that that is a shared value, just the closeness of family and how important that is, at least for my husband's family, which is important to us. But I felt like that was something. And then also, like, Brits love to have a good time. And so I felt like that, like, there's always going to be going to the pub after anything, you're celebrating something. And where I'm from in Texas, like, we like to do the same as well. So I thought that that was really cool.
What's the biggest difference between Americans and?
Um, I would just say maybe like culture and like personality. Just how I feel like Americans are, it's that stereotype of like always being happy and being the world's cheerleader. But I do feel that Americans tend to be more positive. I get it, right? Like it rains a lot in England. And sometimes that will affect moods and behaviors. And so I do tend to feel like the biggest difference was just like the overall kind of happiness and positivity between Americans and Brits. And the weather. I think the weather is really big too. I mean, which is kind of like duh, but I didn't realize how much it rains in Manchester. It rains a lot, and I didn't know what to expect. But I'm from Texas, where it's really really hot. Most of the time, it's going to be really sunny. It does rain as well, but it's more like flooding. But I just did not realize like how rainy it gets, and then especially in the wintertime how early it gets, like it's dark, it's just dark for majority of the day. So that was a big difference as well.
So how was your interaction with your local community? Go to the restaurants, hotels, or grocery.
I would say, like I said, because my husband's family, like that was my initial community, and I'm really grateful for that. Because he did have such a big family, like I didn't feel like I had to go, just make a lot of friends, because that was like my community. I was part of a running group that anytime I would come visit, I actually started to join practices and training runs with this running group. So I kind of had developed that community. But then when it came to working with my colleagues, like a lot of my workmates became friendships. So I think it was, not anything different than if I was to be in America.
Mm.
Really, really good people. Like the people that I met were genuinely amazing, and friends that I know that I will have for the rest of my life. So that is something I will say, is that the people that I've made friendships with in the UK, I'm really grateful for.
That's good to know. Have difficulty finding friendships, especially the real friendships. Like maybe your friends as high and low and interaction, but to create a group, they're having difficulty with that. And some of them had been treated differently. That's
Yeah.
sometimes because they look different.
I think maybe it's in the spaces that I was working in where the difference was more appreciated. Because in education, providing different perspective, especially as a humanities, social studies teacher, like I had mentioned, I was able to provide a perspective as an American when I'm teaching a unit on USA. So that was more appreciated. And then working for Lush is a very open minded company, and they are such an amazing brand to work for. And the people also kind of show that the people that they hire are just really friendly and open-minded people, very accepting. So I will say that it's probably the positions and the communities that I'm in that just happen to be people who were open-minded and appreciated me, appreciated, um, that I was American, and didn't see me didn't see me as any different.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions of the British people about Americans and vice versa?
Biggest misconceptions. I'm not really for sure. I always would get, the stereotypical stuff about Americans always having guns. But I'm from Texas, so that's actually not far from the truth. Um, but I don't own a gun. I didn't go to a school on a horse. Um, Brits, not all British people love the Queen, or love the monarchy. So I do think that people have, like, who come to visit England, kind of think that they all talk with a very posh and southern accent. But if you've ever been to obviously Liverpool or Manchester, that's not the case. So I would just say that there was just differences in that, but not, I don't know. I really wouldn't. There's so many things that could go into the misconceptions that I just was like, I don't fit into any of those boxes. So hopefully, I break all those stereotypes for you.
Yeah. Having lived here for what was that, 3 years before you left?
um,
So,
yeah. So I was, well, off and on for 3 years because I was in America for that big chunk of time.
mhm. Okay, so let's say 3 years.
Yeah.
Um, So you're coming back here. Okay, so having lived that 3 years, what would you say are your favorite thing about the UK, and what is your least favorite thing?
Um, can also say that like my favorite a high that I enjoyed, because I know that I've talked about like the differences and things that I didn't find very great in the UK, was the fact that like I was able to run the London Marathon.
Ooh.
I'm a marathoner. I was planning on running the London 2020 marathon, but then COVID happened a month before. And so I had been training all the way to that point, and then it got canceled. So then we're in our homes. I'm stuck in Morocco. We weren't even allowed to go outside during COVID. So, like, that was such a major shift in like my body and everything, around the world. And so then we made the decision that we're moving to England. And so I had to defer for the next year. And then I was like, well, I'm not ready because I'm in America. So I couldn't run in 2021. So then I ran the 2023, like I ran it, I'm sorry, London 2022. So I ran it in October, um, London 2022, after waiting like 5 years to like run this major marathon. Um, so that was something that had been on my bucket list. I was also raising funds for Cancer Research UK, because my husband's mother and stepmother passed away from cancer. So this is something that I had been wanting to do for a long time and finally was able to do it. And so I just love how things are so like centrally located in England, like you're close to Europe. I was
Mm-hmm.
able to take a train down to London for the marathon. My husband was able to drive. And it was such a great experience, and I love that there's always something going on, whether it's a music gig, whether it's a major marathon.
Mm.
Um, there's just amazing things that are going on in the country that are accessible to do.
Your least favorite?
Um, Again, like I said, didn't really like the weather.
Yeah.
And just the darkness of it all. I would say that actually it affected me more than I thought it did, because when the sun would come out and the summer would be here, I was like, oh, there's the sun. And then obviously moving to Vietnam where it's hot year round and I see the sun
Mm-hmm.
every day, I was like, wow, I really was missing the sun. Like I was so uh, I'm a brown girl, I'm Latina. So I was like, I'm really light skinned. Like I don't have as much melanin as I did when I was growing up because I was always in the sun playing
Mm-hmm.
sports. So that really was a big thing.
Yeah. Um, does it help that you don't have a kid?
It does. I think the ability, well, I honestly think now that it would be easier to travel with a child than it would be to travel with an animal,
Mhm.
because our cat is Moroccan, and the paperwork process to get her to the UK, again, back to like the rules and laws that the UK has, which is very difficult. So we were stuck in Paris for a week when we were migrating to the UK, because we took a flight from Morocco to Paris and then Paris to Manchester. And we realized that her paperwork was not going to transfer over to like the UK. So we had to transfer it to an EU pet passport.
Wow.
We then had to be foot passengers, from France to England, because that was the only way we could take our cat. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
was just like, we're moving with all of these suitcases and our cat. And
Yeah.
I don't think it would have been that hard if I just had a child. Like,
Yeah.
yes, it's hard
Exactly.
to move, but you just need a passport, right? They're
Mm.
human. So
Yeah.
um yeah, that I do think that there are certain aspects of, being a couple without children versus, if you were to have a child.
Yeah. Exactly. If you move to a new country and
Yeah.
start a new life.
Now let's go back to our guest, Michelle Guzman.
So you are still on a spouse visa, but you're outside the country right now. And you intend to come back here and pursue your ILR and citizenship and eventually live here for the rest of your life, or what's the plan?
No. So when we decided to leave the UK, we made that decision that that could affect my visa, that I would have to reapply again if
Mm.
possible, if because I'm what from what I've been told and what I've looked into is that that jeopardizes, like if you're outside the country for a certain amount of time, then you're jeopardizing your residency. And they could question like, what is your, why have you been out of the country for this long? Were you planning on settling somewhere
Mhm,
else?
mhm.
So we made that decision that we were not, if we wanted to go back to the UK and live, situations economically needed to be better. So that wouldn't be for maybe another 5, 10 years from now. And we want to start having children and we want to raise our children in an international, you know, community and world where they have access to different languages, where they're meeting people from all different parts of the world. And once the children hopefully are older, then we could settle in the US or we could settle in the UK and start
Yes,
that
it's
process.
still in the plate.
Say it again.
It's still in the plate.
Yeah, but not anytime soon.
Mhm,
We're having some issues with our current school right now,
mm,
so I know I kept you updated about that.
yeah,
So that could be that has been a thought. Like, do we go back to the UK temporarily? And if that is the
mhm.
case, I'm only allowed to work for a certain amount of time, and then my visa expires, and
Right,
then
exactly. Yeah.
I'm a tourist again. So
What can you say? Yeah, what can you say about the immigration process?
it was very lengthy and very expensive. And I know that for people who are wanting to move to the UK and they don't already have a visa, I know that the government was trying to increase the threshold, which is like almost unattainable for a lot of people, which I don't think is right.
Mhm,
Because it was already very difficult for my husband and I, and we're both professionals, educators.
mhm.
And it was just really expensive and very time consuming. And so we never want to have to do that again where we're separated. So if we were to go back to the UK, we would apply and we both would be out of the country. So at least that we're together. Um, it's just that I feel like that's kind of how the British way of doing things. It's just very paperwork and tedious, paperwork for everything. So
Mm. They love surely loves papers. Do
yeah.
you still say what would you say? Would you still suggest for people who are planning to come here? Is it worth it?
Um, oof. I do know that they've also have made it accessible for like students who are studying in the UK if they're wanting now to like work right after university. I know that there was like a visa that they could transfer to with that. So I think that's cool. Like if you're young and you're wanting to live in a different country and experience that, I would definitely recommend that. Um, but if you're in a situation like my husband and I, you just need to be prepared for just expenses that you wouldn't think that would be that expensive. Um, and potentially being separated from your spouse. I just
Mhm,
don't think I feel like there could be a better way, especially if you are legally married, that there should not be a separation. I know that they do. I know during COVID they were making exceptions. Um, and if it's like if you have a child, that can also possibly be an exception. But I don't think that that should be a reason as to you being separated from your spouse.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know if I would recommend it doing it that way.
Yeah.
If there's an easier way, you're young and you're in school and you want to transfer to a different visa for work, go for it. But if you want to experience something new and you have the ability and finances to do it, why not? But yeah,
So you would just say, is it right to say that your discouragement of the UK is more of the process and the length and the expenses?
yeah.
But on top of that, are there any other reasons why it's not appealing for you at the moment?
I just don't want to go back to the UK. We love our life here in Asia. It's low cost of living, and we're making a really good salary. But just through this process, I'm also a woman of color, and as being a Latin woman, there wasn't where I was in Manchester. There wasn't a big community in London, because it's London, it's a very diverse, it's a very huge city. There are communities of Latin people that are a lot larger, and there are in Manchester too, but not a lot. I mean, not even a lot of Americans. I've rarely met Americans. They are out there, and they're uni students as well. But I just didn't feel like I came across a lot of Americans. And then, not on top of that, Latin Americans. So
Mm-hmm.
trying to find like Mexican food or Latin food was very few and far between. I found them, I love it, but it was very few and far between.
Mm. Did you feel like you were away from home? You couldn't feel that you were home. You knew you were in Manchester.
I felt home because of the people, like my
Mm.
family and my husband's family. But yeah,
Like
it's
that now.
yeah, like I would have to get food sent to me, like ingredients that I can
Mm.
make, like home dishes and salsa and tacos
Mm.
and things that felt like home for me culturally. Like I had to get sent, or I would bring with me when I would come back from America.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you still miss home? And obviously you miss the food. Other
Yeah.
than that, do you still?
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually have not seen my family like face to face in 2 years. So I am homesick for sure. And I'm planning on going home this summer in June for my sister's graduation. She's graduating from university. And I am just so excited to like see my family, just spend time with them because it's been 2 years now. So
Mm.
it's a
Yeah.
lot.
What would you say as to close the discussion? What would you say to the Americans, or maybe not even Americans, just immigrants who wants to move to the? First of all, for the women, especially for the women who want to move or who are planning to move or are probably already in the process of moving
Mhm.
here, and also to just in general who wants to move to the UK. What would you say?
Yeah. I would say, if that is something that is a passion of yours and you have the financial ability to do it for whatever reason, go for it. And you will like the UK. There will be major differences. And again, the cost of living crisis is still happening. But just know that, like, if you're in this process, you are not alone. I know that there were times of uncertainty. There were times of like a lot of like missing your person, but eventually it will pass and you will be able to see each other again. And you can just continue on your next stage of life together. And I think that that is something that is so important. I wish I would have heard a lot more of in this process. I know that the expat groups um, helped my husband and I so much just through the spousal process, because it was the words of encouragement to see people who got their visas and they were reuniting with their spouse. Um, but just know it's just a season and that will pass to the next season of your life.
Right, great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And it's really good and refreshing to hear a different perspective, different story. And good luck to everything else that you wanted to do in Vietnam or wherever it would be your next stop.
Yeah. Thank
I wish you all the
you.
best. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I hope that our listeners will get something or learn something from your story.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in and for staying with us with this 2 hour show on this Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. Please don't forget to follow me on my social media accounts: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Effie Barker, SoundCloud at Effie Barker, YouTube Effie Barker Human Interest, and Spotify Effie Barker Human Interest. Till next time on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, only here on Love the Beat Radio, LDBR.